Okay, thank you so much. So, two hard acts to follow, right? But I have no choice but to follow. So, okay, free will and Islamic thought. So maybe let's just start with a brief exercise. Okay?
I'm not doing that.
If you choose. Whoever wants to stand up can stand up. Okay? And you don't have to. Okay? Yeah, now, of those who are standing up, yeah, can you lift up a leg? Yeah? Okay, and now, what? Can you lift the other leg?
What, at the same time?
No, okay, alright, so maybe then...
It's a gravitational.
Okay, sit back down. I'll leave that one as it is. I'll leave it now, alright? We might come back to it, okay? Alright. Okay, so, look, before we can talk about free will and Islamic thought, I have to say something about Islamic thought, okay? It sounds obvious, but it needs stated, okay? Yeah, Islamic thought is diverse, right? You know, there's a vast range of theological, philosophical, ethical, mystical trends in Islamic thought, in contemporary periods and throughout history. Right? So how can we use this tag Islamic? Right? So a couple of premises which are important for some of the discussion that we're going to have. Right? Is that, look, amongst this vast diversity of Islam and its history and its practice and its thinkers, there's a shared commitment, okay, to an idea of the oneness of God. Okay? Referred to as Tawheed, okay, the unity of God. The typical doctrinal statement of a Muslim, first part of the typical doctrinal statement of a Muslim is there is no God but God. Right? Of course, what this means is deeply contested amongst Muslim theologians, philosophers, and mystics. Right? But there's a shared commitment to the idea of one God. There's then a shared commitment amongst Muslims that Muhammad, somebody who lived 1400 years ago, according to Muslims' accounts, was the messenger of God. And this results in a shared commitment to revelation. Again, there's contested conceptions of what revelation is and how to interpret it. Okay? So that's, if you like, my starting point. Alright? So I can't give you a comprehensive survey of Islamic thought and debates on free will. Right? Okay, so debates on free will and determinism have been picked up, okay, in a variety of theological, philosophical, and mystical modes. Right? I'm going to just look at some of the relevant discussions, hopefully to create conversation and to see some of the framing of these discussions, particularly in theological discussions, okay, amongst Muslims. And it's become a hallmark, or it was a hallmark question of a particular mode of philosophical theology in Islamic thought. Right? A particular mode of philosophical theology referred to as Kalam theology. Some of you have studied philosophy or philosophy of religion might have heard of the Kalam argument for the existence of God. Have you heard of that? No, never mind. All right, never mind. Okay, it's a form of rational theology, okay, Kalam theology, right? So the question of determinism and free will actually became a hallmark question, okay, which invoked different responses. But it is a theological question for Muslims, particularly in this discipline of Kalam. And the relationship between determination and free will was actually a question, became seen as a question about thinking about the relationship between divine action and human action. Remember, there's that shared idea amongst Muslims that there is a God. Right? So the question is, how does God's actions, if you like, the cause, relate to human actions? Okay. So how do you reconcile, or how do Muslims, or how do theologians, or how do anybody who might accept the idea of a God reconcile notions of a powerful God, in the Muslim tradition, the creator, with ideas of human freedom and divine justice? Because if we don't have a choice, how can we be accountable? So the question of moral responsibility, again, comes up very, very strongly in these discussions, okay? Go ahead.
Just a quick question with is it the Kalam cosmological argument that you're referring to?
Kalam cosmological argument. So here, Kalam cosmological argument, stuff moves, okay? So there must be a mover. So basically, really, really simply, right? Okay? Yeah, and when they say the Kalam cosmological argument, Kalam refers to that kind of genre, okay, of particular philosophical theology. Yeah? So here, actually, we're looking at how these debates about divine action and human action emerged out of Kalam. Yeah?
Thank you.
Brilliant. Elliot, yeah, well done. Yeah. 10 points, okay? All right, so within Kalam theology, okay, philosophical theology, speculative theology, they're trying to think, okay, how do we reconcile this idea then that there's a powerful God, okay, and is there space then for human actions? And what does it mean to believe, because it became a doctrine for many Muslims, it's a doctrine of belief to say that there is divine decree and determination. What does that even mean? Okay? How can we reconcile this idea, with this sense of freedom and responsibility that we have? If human acts, or if humans act freely, does this undermine God's role as the creator? Right? So if I'm doing something, does this take away, from the idea of God? And if God is the absolute creator, the one absolute creator, how can we be accountable for our actions? Because if he's creating actions, what happens to moral responsibility? So moral responsibility is really important, okay? Whichever angle we're looking at it from, even in this type of analytical mode, which Yusuf was doing, or in a theological mode. So there's prominent theories on the nature of human actions which emerged out of Kalam theology now. So I'm just picking up the discourse out of Kalam theology and leaving to side mystical discourses or more Abyssinian philosophical discourses within Islamic thought. Just mention 4 very briefly, right? So one was an idea of determinism. I'm being careful here saying an idea of determinism because as you see introduced, when you say determinism, it could be many, many different things. So there was an idea of determinism, referred to in Arabic as jabr. Okay? Yeah, at the opposite extreme, okay, there was an idea of delegation. Right? So determinism here revolved around the idea that God is the only actor. Right? So when we're talking about causes, God is the only cause. And the immediate cause for every action. It's not only the first domino. Right? Okay, fire doesn't burn, it's God that makes the fire burn. Right? It's that sort of sense. Okay? So God is the only actor. Right? On the other side, you have this idea of delegation. Okay? Right? Where humans have power to act free from divine control. So there's some delegated space where they're absolutely free. Then you have theories in between. All right? A very, very important one. Okay, quite widely held amongst Muslim theologians to this day, is a position described to as, acquisition theories. I'm going to put plural there, because you've got a range here. And the basic idea is here, is God creates human acts, and these are then acquired by humans when they choose to act in a particular way. So God's creator, and humans choose at the point of action. And then there's another one which described itself as the theory of the middle way. Despite this spin, Muslims always try to position themselves, Muslim theologians at least, always try to position themselves as moderate. Right? So everybody's trying to claim the middle ground. Right? So when it came to the question of free will and determinism, there was one particular position which actually described itself as the middle way. Right? And here they're saying humans are free to act, but through divine decree. Right? So there's a determined portion of space for human action, right? Human free action. And actually that's the theory we're going to look at most closely. Okay, so first the 2 opposing poles of the debate. Right? Again, just to give you a sense of where is the theological concern which drove lots of rational deliberation amongst Muslims. Where is it coming from? So we said determinism on one side. okay, and delegation on the other. Right? For the determinists, okay, where was the theological concern? They said no one really acts except God. Right? So there's a theological commitment to God being the only actor, the absolute creator. And acts are attributed to humans metaphorically. And they give us examples that, look, actually we use this type of language in everyday usage. When we look out the window, you can't see trees here. We say the tree's moving. Okay, is the tree moving? Okay, yeah, it probably is when it's searching for water underneath the ground, right? But typically when we say the tree is moving, it's the wind which is moving the tree, right? Okay, or when we say that the sun has set. Yeah, we're ascribing actions to the sun, which are actually a result of the rotation of the earth. Okay, so and for the strong determinists, I'm saying that no, we're just attributing human acts. We're just attributing acts to humans metaphorically. Okay, in the same way we do to many other things in everyday language. And here, although sometimes this was associated with positions which wanted to maintain state authority and power, there was a theological concern. Okay, there was a theological concern. Okay, with maintaining God's power. Okay, and ascribing actions to other than God would undermine his oneness, his tawheed. On the flip side, you had, or on the other end of this spectrum, you had this theory of delegation or tafweed, where humans act with a power or capacity given to them by God, but free from him. Okay, or her, however you want to use that language. So God is not the only actor in this theory. And here there was a theological concern, not with God's power, but with God's justice. Okay? As central within the formulation of this idea. And the concern was, look, if we're not free in our actions, why send prophets to recommend that we do this, or recommend that we don't do that? Okay? Yeah, and if we're not free in our actions, how could a just God hold us accountable? Again, within the monotheistic view of Islam, on a day of judgment, okay, in a life to come. So you have these two opposing sides of the debate. One was concerned, at least from a pure theological point of view, with preserving God's power, the other with preserving God's justice. And these actually revolved around, and this is, I have to be careful here because we've got a meta-ethicist here, right? Okay, this actually revolved around different meta-ethical positions. Okay? So when we talk about meta-ethical positions, we talk about different positions about the nature of morality. Okay, what does it even mean for something to be moral in the first place? Right? So, and again, two major, if you like, poles of the debate, okay, in Muslim theology, which are reminiscent with, actually more or less in line with Plato's Euthyphro dilemma. If anybody's come across it before? Okay, so in Plato's, in the dialogue with Plato, the idea was, okay, is something good because the gods command it? Right, gods plural. Is something good because the gods command it? Right? Or do the gods command that which is good? Okay? Right, so they're the two classical horns of the debate. Right? So here, within Muslim thought, okay, on one side you have the development of a divine command theory, or an ethical voluntarism. Okay, on the other side you have a moral objectivism, or a moral rationalism. For the moral rationalists, okay, they held that, look, it's not possible for God to do injustice. God can't do that which is unjust. Right? Okay, and he only commands that which is just. Right? So the nature of God is such that he calls us to things which are good. Okay, prevents us from things which are bad. Okay, this implies that justice, right and wrong, these are either objective or at the very least something intelligible. Right? Something which humans can grasp, independent of revelation and independent of prophets. Okay, independent of something external. And justice became more important than God's power here. But even in this debate, there was concern here. You'll see from the divine command theorists, okay, which again we find across religious and philosophical traditions, right? Okay, look, as soon as you say that God only commands that which is just, somebody who wants to preserve God's power would say, has this limited God? Right? So this position of a moral objectivism or a rationalism was associated with numerous Muslim schools, one of them being the Mu'tazili and another one being the Shi'i. The divine command theorists, or the ethical voluntarists, they suggested that whatever God does or commands, so if he forced me to rob the bank, going back to the example we had before, if I didn't have a choice and the cause was God, it would be just. Right? Okay, because whatever God does or commands is just. Justice, right and wrong are defined by him. He's God. Right? And he's not subservient to anything. You see the concern with God's power. Hopefully. Yeah, and if God was to lie, even if God was to lie, it would be good. Although proponents of this position, amongst Muslim theologians, they did say, although he has never done so. Alright? Okay? And this is associated with the Ash'ari school of theology. Alright. Back to the prominent theories of nature, of human acts, okay, in Muslim Kalam theology. Right? So look, a pure determinism, and delegation. So the two poles have largely been rejected. You often get in theological writing, you get straw men. And not just theological writing, even philosophical writing. To some extent, we had a very strong vision of determinism put towards us, okay, earlier on, right? Okay, so that's often helpful for thinking and deliberation, right? So in a similar way, Muslim theologians generally rejected pure determinism and delegation. Acquisition theories, this idea that God creates and humans acquire when they act, when they choose, okay, this was seen as consistent with the divine command theory, okay, or divine command ethics. Okay, and as I said before, basically the idea is that God creates human acts and these are acquired by humans when they choose to act in a particular way. What did this allow the theologian to do? It allowed the theologians to preserve the unity of God's power, okay, as well as the space for accountability, human accountability. Because the accountability comes down to the choice, whereas the act is still being created by God. Then we have, of course, the theory of the middle way, which I'm going to just unpack a little bit further. I'm not keeping an eye on time, so I should be careful. Right? If I could choose to be careful. Right, so the theory of the middle way is consistent with the Mu'tazili and the Shi'i rational morality. Okay, and restating, I've said it briefly already, that humans are free to act, but only through divine decree. Well, they have some space for free action, but that space for free action, is through divine decree. And it really is, in the conception that I'm going to share, really is through divine decree. Alright, so theory of the middle way, okay, freedom of choice, okay, in this conception is an element within the causal chain that yields voluntary actions. Okay? So a voluntary action as opposed to an involuntary action, we have a kind of commonsensical idea that when I'm speaking asleep, when I'm sleep talking, this is an involuntary action. When I'm not conscious of my breathing, this is an involuntary action. When I'm speaking now, it's a voluntary action. When I'm speaking in the state of wakefulness, it's a voluntary action. Right? So freedom of choice is an element, okay, not the element, okay, within the causal chain that yields voluntary actions. And voluntary acts require an exercise of choice. Acts are neither determined, absolutely, nor delegated in the sense that they're absolutely free, of divine control. Right? So this is the way between the two ways. So the theory seeks to preserve God's unity and his justice, okay, allowing for a space for human accountability and moral responsibility. Where justice here is seen as a rationally intelligible sense. Justifications for the middle way. Right. The first one's a really simple one, although, again, we might see problems and we could talk about this later on. Okay, so, yeah, classical theologians have said, look, there's just an obvious difference between a voluntary act and an involuntary act. The difference, anybody been pushed into a swimming pool before? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. It's not the same as stepping off into the pool. There's a self-evident, clear difference between being pushed, okay, and stepping off. Right? So the first argument they offer is simply that there's a clear and obvious self-evident difference between voluntary acts and involuntary acts. And then, of course, there's also scriptural elements to this debate. Right? And so they would argue that there's extensive attribution, okay, of acts to human, okay, in Revelation, okay, in Scripture. Right? So, of course, there are verses in the Quran, as we find in other Abrahamic faiths and texts, like the Old Testament, New Testament, that God created you and that which you do, okay, which could be read, okay, to support a deterministic view of the world, right, and a divine deterministic view of the world. Yeah, but the middle way would say, look, this needs to be read in light of other verses, okay, such as whoever does a wrong will be requited for it. And there's then recourse made, okay, to principles of metaphysics. And again, metaphysics, you've got a variety of schools of metaphysics in Muslim thought. The most influential Muslim metaphysician, okay, and some have argued, not just Muslim metaphysician, but the most influential metaphysician of the pre-modern world, Avicenna, okay, Ibn Sina, okay, but the most recent school of Muslim metaphysics is of Mullah Sadra, okay, but I'm not going to go into further details there. We'll just look at some of the principles which they draw on, some contemporary thinkers have been drawing on to support this idea of justification in the middle way. So, one is that the modality, so it's metaphysics now, talking about the nature of existence, okay? Right, so the modality of the occurrence of cause and effect, okay, and the singular mode of existence. So I'm just going to explain these very, very briefly, introduce these two principles, and then hopefully wrap up with some questions for discussion. Okay? If that sounds okay with my timing, right? Okay, so modality of effect from cause. So the idea is, in this particular metaphysical view, that effects, okay, are relational. Effects, okay, they have no independence from their cause. So, existential cause and effect are not like a series of dominoes. Right? Why? Because existential effects are relational to their cause. Right? So, what's going on here? All right, so they give the analogy of like prepositions in a sentence. Okay? So, prepositions in a sentence. I hope there's no English grammarians here, by the way. Okay? Yeah. If there is, just help me out if I'm using prepositions poorly. Okay? Forgive me. But hopefully the example will be clear, or relatively clear. Look, so in a sentence, I travelled from Birmingham to London. Okay? It's a reasonable sentence. Okay? It's very straightforward. Okay? Here, the prepositions here they're pointing to are from and to. Okay? Now the idea is that prepositions, when they're in a sentence, they're meaningful. Yeah? Okay, so when I say I travelled from Birmingham to London, there's a sense of from and to which comes into your mind. A concrete sense, yeah, of from and to which comes into the mind. But if I just say to or from, okay, yeah, these abstract concepts, okay, yeah, all right, we could replace them with a nominal concept. Say from, yeah, is about some sort of travel or some sort of direction. Okay, but the word from in and of itself has no independent meaning. Okay, unless it's in a sentence, it's dependent upon its sentence. Right? Okay, so they have this idea that prepositions, particularly in Arabic, okay, works even clearer in Arabic. Okay. Yeah, that prepositions are relational. they have no independent. Actually, in Arabic, they talk about three types of fundamental grammatical components, right? Yeah, a verb, a noun, and a preposition. Okay, and a preposition is defined by grammarians as being that which has no independent meaning. Right? For it to have concrete meaning, it needs to be in a sentence. Okay, right? So I travelled from Birmingham to London, so they want to make an analogy between this type of sense of dependence between cause and effect. Look, from and to have no concrete independent meaning outside their usage in sentence. Right? And in the same way, okay, effects are related to their cause. Okay, there is no independence of an effect, okay, without its cause. And if we say human choice and freedom are an effect, these are absolutely contingent upon their existential cause, which in the Muslim theological philosophical framework is, of course, God. Right? So human choice and freedom are contingent upon their existential cause because effects are relational. Right? Human freedom thus is dependent. Okay? Yeah, so it's a qualified freedom. Human freedom is dependent and relational in its existence. Second metaphysical principle there we go. Right? Okay, existence is of a single mode. Right? So now when we talk about existence, okay, its modality, okay, is one. Yeah, irrespective of the existent that I'm talking about. Right? So say the table exists. Yeah? Okay? The chair exists. Right? When I ascribe existence to any of these two things, it's existence. Is that fair enough? Yeah? Okay. So that's the basic sense of what's going on here, right? Okay, so now irrespective of whether the existence, I'm not now talking about a table or chair, but now I'm saying, okay, if the existence is the necessary existent being in this theological philosophical view, God. Alright? Okay, so irrespective of whether the existence is necessary or whether the existence is contingent, i.e. it's dependent, it's a result of effects. Okay? It didn't have to be. Right? Irrespective of whether the existence is necessary or the existence is contingent, they both exist. Right? And existence comes with effects, including capacity. Right? Now, every existence has capacity. Although capacity may vary, okay, depending on the subject of that existence, so although capacity varies in intensity and strength, you can't strip existence from capacity, or in a human sense, some level of capability. Right, so, back to the middle way. Right, no act of a human, okay, according to this middle way theory, right, no act of a human can be seen as entirely independent from the necessary existence. Right, it's dependent, it's relational. So the freedom of choice, the freedom to human act is absolutely dependent, okay, on its existential cause. Yet every act is relational, occurring through the necessary existence. So you have neither delegation, right? Delegation, remember, being that God's given something over, right? Okay? Yet nor do we have determinism, right? Because there is this space for action, there is this capacity, this capability. Yet voluntary acts, therefore, can be ascribed to humans from one perspective, and at the same time, the same acts could be ascribed to God from another perspective. And this provides a vision, if you like, a dependent scope for human freedom, maintaining a room for moral accountability, as well as divine unity and divine justice. Okay, so some questions, all right, which we may get to, we may not get to. All right, so in what ways, so going away from this case of seeing how are these ideas thought about within a particular theological tradition, right, which of course has theological assumptions, right? So if you're like stepping back from that, in what ways could a belief in some divine power or a God impact arguments about determinism and free will? Right? Is it relevant? Okay. Yeah? And do you agree, actually, that assumptions, so Muslims saw questions about the nature of morality being really tied up to this debate? Okay? Yeah, do you agree? Yeah, are questions about what do we mean by morality anyway? Yeah, okay, what does it mean to be morally responsible? So in the basic sense that something be praiseworthy or blameworthy is, again, exactly how Muslim theologians and philosophers conceptualize it in the way that Yussi introduced us to it. So is that question about moral responsibility, moral accountability, is it relevant? Okay, and if so, how and why? Yeah, and then, even if it's just as a theoretical exercise, it will be interesting to hear your thoughts about whether the acceptance of the dependence on God. Because look, you see, across the scope of those Muslim theories, they wanted to preserve their vision of God. Okay, although they're contested visions of God. Right? A God who is in some ways in control. Okay, if not always in control. Right? Can acceptance of dependence on God still be empowering for human action or not? Yeah? Okay, thank you so much.